question and answer portion of the GIC Talk. For those of you who might have come in after the talk began, we'd like to take this opportunity to remind you to please make sure your cell phones are turned off or switched to silent mode. Thank you. Now, if you didn't get a piece of paper when you walked in, please raise your hand and one of our volunteers will make sure that you get a piece of paper. When you've written your question down, please hand it to one of the volunteers, and then the volunteers in turn will bring it up to me. Please don't ask the speaker directly any questions. You can have an opportunity to talk to him after the talk if your question isn't asked. So let's begin with your questions. So you did a very brief bit about yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about when, why, and how you first came to Korea?
When, why, and how? Okay, well, I came to Korea about a year and a half ago with my wife Katie, who happens to be in the audience. Wave hello, Katie. We were just finishing up university. I was finishing up a master's degree, and knew that we wanted to go abroad. We knew that we wanted to leave America and go somewhere else. And the more we learned about Korea, the more it really made just a lot of sense in so many ways. So we looked, and EPIC was a great way to come to Korea and learn more about Korea and sort of experience Korean culture. So we signed up, and they were silly enough to accept us. So here we are.
Okay. You mentioned that you were pursuing a master's degree. What is your educational background? What was your field for your master's?
Well, I have an undergraduate degree in media production, so lots of video, audio, a little bit of web work, and my master's is in adult education. So what I like to do now is I like to blend media into educational pursuits in sort of new and interesting ways. That may be a talk for maybe a future GIC talk. But so right now I'm teaching at two middle schools here in Gwangju. I'm hoping in August to make the transition to university teaching, because teaching adults is really where my heart's at. Nothing against middle schoolers. They're great people, but I would much rather be teaching adults.
Indeed. So several people are curious how you mentioned you've been painting models for 16 years?
About that.
About 16 years. How did you first get started painting? What were your motivations when you began painting?
Well, I had some friends who were playing Warhammer 40K, the sort of the big game that we talked about, where it's very easy to find opponents. I saw them playing with all their neat toys, and frankly, I got jealous of their toys. They would get together every weekend and maybe have a beer and play some games, and I thought, oh, that's awesome. And so they invited me to play a few times, and I did, and I enjoyed that experience. But then they said, well, you should try to paint these. Oh, I can't do that. That's so small. There's no way I could possibly. Look at all that detail. I can barely see that. And then a friend of mine, Chad, said, okay, Paul, you're going to sit down in this chair. You're going to use these brushes. We're going to sit down and we're going to paint this model together. I painted it and I enjoyed it. The model looked terrible, but I really enjoyed the painting experience, especially with my good friend. And so that really was what started it. And then at one point I was working in a shop that sold these kinds of things, and so then it's, having all of those models available, it was like a kid in a candy store. Just every day, it's like, what new thing can I paint?
So have you had any painting or other art and crafts interests outside of painting miniatures? Have you ever done any other arts and crafts?
I do engage in other arts and crafts. This is by far the one that I've gotten into the deepest. I like papercraft in a variety of ways. I like sort of that pop-up book style paper engineering. Oh, I love that stuff. Man. It's awesome. But anyway, I'm terrible at painting on a two-dimensional canvas, though. My wife insists that I'm not as bad as I think I am, but no. Two-dimensional surfaces, I'm just not good at. But really, models is where my heart is really at.
So can you tell us a little bit about where you get your materials, and what are the general costs for materials, and is it more difficult to procure the things you need here in Korea?
I'll answer your last question first and then go back to the beginning. Is it more difficult to get the things I need in Korea? Yes and no. Brushes are a little tricky to find in America, where I'm from. The paints can sometimes be a little tricky to find, but those things are surprisingly easy to find here. It's the models that are tricky. So some of the basic things that you're going to need a palette. I didn't clean my palettes before I came, but these are very easy to find at Modern, right down the street, or any old stationery store here. Also, the brushes are very, very easy to find. Really, any stationery store is going to have the right kind of brushes for you. Again, size 1, size 0 can be mostly what you're going to need. For paints, if you're just getting started, honestly, just a basic starter set of acrylics like this is going to get you a long way. It's not perfect by any stretch, but if you're just starting for 8,000 won, this is going to do the job. You can also get a set of files at a hardware store, or really just about anywhere. I think I got these at a Daiso. You can find files just about anywhere. This is sort of a fancy glue that I brought from America, but again, you can find a kind of glue that will work for the models at most sort of places around here. I tend to use a slightly fancier paint than the base set. That's a little harder to find. The models are really the most difficult element to find here. There's, in terms of brick and mortar stores, you can order online, but in terms of going into a place, looking at the models, choosing the ones you want, there's really only 1 or 2 stores in the entirety of the peninsula where you can find that. There's one in Seoul called Porktown, which is pretty good for Warhammer Fantasy models, for K models. There's a couple of models from that company here, but most of the models that I get I've ordered in from the States. In fact, there was a rather large box that showed up just a couple days ago. Oh man, it was like Christmas. I was just going through models, and my wife took some pictures, and I would say they're embarrassing, but I don't know. It's true, I just love this stuff.
So you mentioned being able to order models online. Are there any other ways in which the model painting community has changed in the age of the internet?
Well, the internet has opened up a number of things in model painting. Getting models, ordering models online is certainly the biggest, but right next to that is the ability to share work with another painter. So I can paint up a model and show that model off to somebody on the other side of the planet of that. Whereas pre-internet, that was not the case. Also, we can talk about how we're going to use the models, why we're going to use the models in a much more fluent, much easier kind of way. Lastly, and this is a little less to do with the internet and a little more to do with 3D printing. So we've gotten to a place now where you can 3D print a model that can reasonably be painted in this scale, and it looks good. We've just in the past 6 months really gotten to that place with the technology, and I think as we move forward, it's just going to get better and better. It used to be that a company would produce a large set of models and then ship those to a store, and then you would have to go to the store and buy them. I think in 10 years, 5 years, maybe even 2 years, you're going to be going to that company's online store, downloading the file, running that through your 3D printer, and then painting that thing. And I look forward to it. The idea that I can hit play and get a new model to paint, yes please, sign me up.
Can you talk, you talked about how the models are used within games. Can you talk about what are some of your favorite games, and what are some games that you play that aren't this style of game? Are there other games that you play?
Yes, there are tons of other games that I play, but we'll leave that for just a bit. What I tend to use these models for the most is a game called Dungeons and Dragons. It's a role-play game. I run a game, several of my players are in the audience, I see you. And that's what I use these models primarily for. That said, there are still a wide variety of war games that these models are typically used for. Although, moving away from those games, even as something as simple as if you're playing Settlers of Catan, replacing that little black pawn with a painted up robber adds something substantial to the game, I think. Yes, I love playing a variety of other games. Most board games, card games, role-play games, I love them all. When I'm not painting or teaching, I'm usually playing a game.
Can you tell us a little bit about the technique that you described today? How much of that technique is something that's been taught to you, something you picked up on the internet, or how much of it is self-developed?
So the way I describe learning how to paint a miniature to people is that there are a handful of techniques you can be taught, that you can be shown how to do. Maybe 5 or 6 painting techniques that you can, okay, this is how you do this thing. Okay, yeah, you know how to do that. And the rest of it really is learning how your hands and your eyes work. It just comes down to practice. The first miniature you paint is going to look better. It's not going to be the amazing thing that you're hoping it's going to be. And like any other new skill that you pick up. But as you spend time getting into it, you'll learn the subtle differences between, well, maybe it's sort of this technique, but maybe it's kind of a different technique with a brush. Maybe it's sort of a blend of those two things. There's really not a term for what exactly I'm doing with the brush, but it's just the kind of things that you learn on your own as you're painting models over time. So a bit of both. You can be shown a handful of techniques, but mostly it's just getting in there painting models.
Okay, we only have time for one more question today. Now, the talk was very interesting and did generate a lot of good questions. So if we didn't have a chance to ask your particular question today to the speaker, please feel free to approach him after the talk and ask your question directly. So last question, do you have a most difficult and or a most favorite model that you've painted? Can you tell us what that is?
Ooh, most difficult? Probably the most difficult model that I've painted. I have a dragon at home. That's sort of an undead dragon. So imagine zombie dragon, and you're in the right neighborhood. And there's lots of like bones and gore and stuff going on. He's really gross. But he was a real challenge to paint because there's lots of these sort of extra bits that you don't normally deal with in a model, kind of all over the place. And this model was specifically being used for a charity event, RPG Pay to Play, which actually the very next installment of that is happening next weekend. But the model was going to be used for a charity event, so the pressure was on. Like, I needed this model to look really good. He was going to be auctioned off, and that money was going to go to orphans here in Gwangju. So I wanted to make sure that I put my absolute best effort into that model. So that's probably the hardest model I've painted in a while. In terms of favorite models, honestly, I kind of like this fire guy over here because he's got a little light in his bottom, and he kind of lights up. I don't know. It's silly, but I like it.
Okay, that sounds great. So that's all the time we have for the Q&A portion. Let's give Paul another big round of applause for answering our questions. Thank you.